Good morning. Good morning. This is a rebroadcast of today's episode, or rather this week's episode of When Life Needs a Detox. My name is Carol White, and I am your life detox strategist. We are doing a rebroadcast because I lost my signal on the 8 o'clock show, and it did not record the final aspect of today's topic. So let me get started. I don't want to play with this internet connection. Apparently, it's very weak today. So today's topic is the medical profession and slavery. Slaves were lab rats for doctors. Several weeks ago, I received a letter from the All of Us research group requesting my participation in testing the COVID-19 vaccine, as I had tested negative in my blood test previously. Having extraordinarily strong reservations about the entire prospect, I politely declined. So many questions ran through my mind about this. How do you test a vaccine on a person that does not have the COVID-19 virus? Do you infect them and then test? How do you get this accomplished? And if you're going to infect me, with which strain of the virus are you going to infect me? What happens to my family if during this experiment I die? Entice me to participate in this experiment? Or will you be paying for my funeral so that my family doesn't have to incur that cost? It was just all too much to digest. On the other hand, I decided that I was very blessed in the fact that I had a choice in the matter. In this day and age, medical science has a boatload of moral, ethical, and legal constraints against using human subjects without their knowledge or consent. It is nothing like it was in the antebellum South, where doctors could dissect a slave at will without anesthesia, all in the name of medical science. Black slaves were the original lab rats. Now, the reasons for this abominable exploitation are simple. Black patients and Black bodies were the key to the growth of Southern medicine. Slaves presented white doctors with opportunity for experimental research. The exploitation of enslaved patients was commonplace. Finally, the culture of American slavery facilitated and gave impetus to experiments on slaves. Basically, this meant all of the situations made it perfect for the medical profession to misuse slaves for their purposes. Now, you have to bear in mind, slavery times dictated that the life of a slave was nothing in comparison to the life of a white man. In fact, slaves were considered property to be used and or disposed of at the slave owner's discretion. So it seems fitting that the slave owner, the slave trader, and the doctors would choose to make a profit on such a unique commodity. Now, it wasn't just medical schools and colleges that engaged in experimentation. Oh, no. Local doctors attempting to heal conditions in their community often made use of the slave hospitals on plantations. Now, before you get it all twisted up in your mind, don't associate a slave hospital with hospitals of today. Now, a slave hospital was usually a slave cabin that was used to isolate a slave that had fever or sickness. And that cabin was used to make sure that the slave was not faking the illness or condition in an attempt to escape. And there were no beds in slave hospital. There were dirty, torn, raggedy blankets on the floor. Any slave that made it to the hospital, made it to the slave hospital, was automatically put up for use as a lab rat. Now, I think the most horrendous and atrocious aspect of these experiments is that they were done without anesthesia. Without anesthesia. Now, these doctors used an opium that was ineffective for the purpose it was being used for. And the use of this opium resulted in the patient having nausea and constipation. But it did not dull the pain. Now, the use of anesthesia was new and reserved for whites. And in the words of Dr. James Marion Sims, known as the father of modern gynecology, the operations were not painful enough to justify the trouble. All right. Now, doctors in the antebellum South rationalized that since there were marked differences between the black slave and the white man, there was also a difference in their thresholds of pain. Let's just go beyond that. Now, there are several notable doctors during this era, one of them being the aforementioned Dr. James Marion Sims. Now, as the father of modern gynecology, he is noted for his work on fixing the conditions of vesico-vaginal fistula and recto-vaginal fistula. What that basically means is that there's a tear in the wall of the vagina, resulting in chronic leakage from the bladder or the colon. Now, both of these were common results of childbirth during the antebellum era. Also, Dr. Sims is noted for the creation of the speculum. And ladies, we all know that that's that device that opens us up so the doctor can see in there and figure out what. But now you have to understand, when we start talking about vesico-vaginal fistulas, a tear in the vagina, what Dr. Sims was doing was opening the slave woman's vagina up so he could see where the tear was, so he could go in and sew it up. He was going into a woman's vagina. And ladies, you know how sensitive we are. But he's opening this vagina. He's going in and with a needle and thread sewing this woman up. There's no anesthesia. But here's the thing. Because he didn't quite sew everything up correctly the first 13 times, and he did this experiment on several women about 13 times, the stitches got infected. So he has to open her up, go back in and redo it. And he did this 13 times until he was successful. Unfortunately, when the white women found out, oh, he can cure this, but there's no anesthetic being used, white women couldn't stand it. So it was a practice that wasn't widely used. It was perfected, but not widely used. Now, another noted physician was a Dr. Harvey Leonidas Byrd. And with the assistance of Dr. T.J. Dozier, they conducted, electromagnetic therapy experiments on a slave woman named Harriet for the treatment of her seizures. They didn't strap her down. They put these electrodes on her back, had 3 doctors hold her down, and they put electromagnetic shots into this woman for 55 minutes straight. And they did it more than once. More than once in a day. Now, it cured her, but I'm just going to be honest. You stick electrodes on me for 55 minutes, I'm going to, whatever's wrong with me, I'm getting up too. But they're giving credit for studies in electromagnetic shock therapy. I'm just saying. Now, while the belief of the medical profession was that we were vastly different in our pain thresholds, under the skin, we were fundamentally the same. So the use of slaves in medicine just made sense. It's amazing. We're different, but the same. How exactly do you reconcile that? Let me go on. The need for slaves in medicine became so essential that the sale of slaves for medical research became a booming business. Medical schools and colleges put ads in local newspapers for slaves for study and experimentation because medical students needed bodies to study. This opened up a whole new strain of business for slave owners and slave traders. As a matter of fact, when it came to the study of diseases and abnormalities, the more deformed or disabled the slave was, the higher a price they drew. They were basically designer slaves. Can you imagine? And this is why on more than one level, slaves were this country's hottest commodity. We were the lab rats of Southern medicine. And we are the reason there are so many medical advances. But what they put us through to get it, oh my God. Now, if you look at the history of the United States, this atrocious, horrendous, and gut-wrenching treatment of slaves for the sake of medical research can only be compared to the medical experiments in Nazi Germany during the Holocaust. In both cases, there were shocking similarities. You had people held against their will with no say-so as to what happened to them or to their bodies, being experimented on for the sake of medical science. The biggest difference between the Nazi experiments and medical experiments in the antebellum South was that the United Nations deemed the experiments by the Nazis crimes against humanity. Same types of experiments. Both the United States and Nazi Germany claimed what they were doing was for the furtherance of medical research and advancements of the medical profession. But the Nazis, their experiments, their conduct was deemed crimes against humanity. But the atrocities that were inflicted upon the Black slaves by the medical profession in the antebellum South was and still is purported to be in the interest of furthering medical discovery. What kind of garbage is that? Yes, this upset me. I'm just going to be honest. This upset me. As a matter of fact, how can I say? It pissed me off to the highest level of passivity. There are things that we need to research as not just as Blacks or as African Americans, but as a people. We keep talking about we want to have the talk. We want to get rid of racism. We want to end racism. Most people don't want to end racism. They just don't want to talk about it. But we have to talk about it in order to end it. And we have to acknowledge what was done in the past in order to fix the present and to preserve our future. We cannot let this level of toxicity fester anymore. We can't. Because this was just harmful. There's no difference between what our medical professionals here in the United States during the antebellum South era did and what Nazi Germany did to the Jews during the Holocaust. It's the same crap. They're the same atrocities. They're the same mutilations. And I'll tell you something. The medical profession makes it a point not to have this information known. Now, there's a lot that's out here, but I found that they were repeating certain information. They'll repeat about Dr. James Marion Sims because they call him the father of modern gynecology. So they'll put out information on him. Dr. Leonidas Byrd, Harvey Leonidas Byrd, they'll put him out there because he is basically the father of electromagnetic shock therapy. So they'll put this information out, but there are scores of experiments and experimentation we don't know about. The medical profession will not allow this information to be made public. And I'll give you an example. It's actually in the feed, and it's called, the article is Power, Opportunism, Racism, Human Experiments Under American Slavery. Now, this is a study done by Stephen C. Kenny. Now, I went to several sites. Now, this site is actually, ScienceDirect is associated with a medical college, a medical university. Now, because it's a medical university, they give you the first page. They'll give you the first page. And then they say, if you want the rest of the study, you have to purchase it. And I decided I wanted to see the study. I did. I wanted to see the study. Well, I made the attempt to purchase it, and it told me because I was not associated with any medical facility, with any medical school, or any academic organization, I was not allowed to have this information. Isn't that amazing? There are also scores of medical journals that were written during this period that have been discontinued, archived, and no one has access to them. That's how bad those experiments are, because if anyone found that information, all of our medical history would be considered, during that time, our medical history would be considered crimes against humanity. And the United States will not allow that to happen. This is why the talks cannot progress, because the information is being hidden. If we want to detoxify this country, if we want to rid our country of racism, we've got to make the information known. We've got to be able to have these conversations from the standpoint of knowledge. Because you can't understand me if you don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what my past is or an aspect of my past is. We've got to have the conversations. Okay, I've run way past my time. This is 21 minutes going into 22. And I'm going to end it right here. But next week, we're going to talk about the medical profession some more. We're going to get into the experiments that were done then and now, because there are some leading up to today's date. And it's important that we understand this, that racism occurs in not just with the police department, not just in business, not just in housing. Racism occurs in the medical profession as well. And we need to cover it all, or as much of it as we can. And on that note, this has been this week's edition of When Life Needs a Detox, September 17th, 2020. I am your host, Carol Ann White. I am your life detox specialist. I love you to the moon and back. I want you to continue to practice your social distancing. Continue to wear your masks. Continue to keep yourselves as safe and as healthy as you possibly can. And we will see each other next week. Bye-bye.